wonder why you and me fight each other. Don't you see the similarities between us? Take a minute and see yourself in the mirror. You look like me, those eyes, lips, you can't deny. Have you thought about why we look the same? Why we feel the same? Don't tell me it's by chance. Oh, you're my brother, you're my sister, we're one big family. Oh, oh, you're my brother, you're my sister, just one big family. It doesn't matter if you live far away from me. You feel, I feel, you bleed, I bleed, you cry and I cry. We sleep and dream. Sometimes we're sad, sometimes we're happy. You breathe, I breathe. We love, walk, talk, and we smile. Have you thought about why we look the same? Why we feel the same? Don't tell me it's by chance. Oh, you're my brother, you're my sister, we're one big family. Oh, 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 you're my brother, you're my sister, just one big family, family. I care about you, and I wish you could realize there's no difference between us two. We're part of one family, no matter how far you are, and even if we don't know each other. Oh, you and me and you, we are one. Oh, you're my brother, you're my sister, we're one big family. Oh, 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 you're my brother, you're my sister, just one big family. Oh, 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 you're my brother, you're my sister, we're one big family. Oh, oh, you're my brother, you're my sister, we're one big family. Oh, oh, you're my brother, you're my sister, just one big family, just one big family.
Aku, kamu, dan mereka, satu rahim Indonesia. Asal
kekerasan seksual itu ada di sekitar kita.
Bagaimana kalau itu seandainya terjadi pada diri kita atau keluarga kita? Kita bayangkan itu adalah kita.
Apakah undang-undang itu diperlukan? Sangat diperlukan.
Landasan hukum ini itu perlu ditonjolkan yang melindungi korban.
Semakin kita sebagai manusia mengulur waktu untuk mau membantu atau mau bergerak, ya semakin banyak pula korban.
Sampaikan dukungan kita semua hukum RUU ini untuk menjadi undang-undang tindak pidana kekerasan seksual.
Angka kasus anak yang berhadapan dengan hukum terus meningkat setiap tahunnya. Proses hukum yang baru dilakukan setelah korban meninggal dunia semakin menunjukkan ada keterlambatan dalam menangani kasus kekerasan seksual yang menimpa perempuan Indonesia.
Kasus kekerasan yang memakan korban pekerja asisten rumah tangga atau ART kembali terjadi di beberapa tempat di Indonesia.
Satreskrim Polresta Bandar Lampung meringkus satu remaja tersangka tindak pidana pencurian sepeda motor yang kerap meresahkan masyarakat.
Polisi menangkap 5 orang anggota geng motor yang membunuh seorang remaja pada malam pergantian tahun baru. Pelaku dendam karena sering berselisih paham dengan geng motor milik korban.
Pelaku pembunuhan satu keluarga di Rembang, Jawa Tengah ditangkap polisi. Polisi menyebut pelaku nekat melakukan pembunuhan karena dendam.
Kasus human trafficking atau perdagangan orang di Indonesia hingga kini terus terjadi. Akhir Februari 2021 lalu, sebanyak 286 korban eksploitasi.
Angka kasus anak yang berhadapan dengan hukum terus meningkat setiap tahunnya. Proses hukum yang baru dilakukan setelah korban meninggal dunia semakin menunjukkan ada keterlambatan dalam menangani kasus kekerasan seksual yang menimpa perempuan Indonesia.
Kasus kekerasan yang memakan korban pekerja asisten rumah tangga atau ART kembali terjadi di beberapa tempat di Indonesia.
Satreskrim Polresta Bandar Lampung meringkus satu remaja tersangka tindak pidana pencurian sepeda motor yang kerap meresahkan masyarakat.
Polisi menangkap 5 orang anggota geng motor yang membunuh seorang remaja pada malam pergantian tahun baru. Pelaku dendam karena sering berselisih paham dengan geng motor milik korban.
Pelaku pembunuhan satu keluarga di Rembang, Jawa Tengah ditangkap polisi. Polisi menyebut pelaku nekat melakukan pembunuhan karena dendam.
Kasus human trafficking atau perdagangan orang di Indonesia hingga kini terus terjadi. Akhir Februari 2021 lalu, sebanyak 286 korban eksploitasi.
Selamat malam semuanya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan, rahayu, dan salam multikultur. Selamat datang di ruang kuliah tamu berjudul Sharing on Forensik Psikologi. Perkenalkan, nama saya Rako Octavia, selaku pembawa acara kuliah tamu pada malam ini. Sebelum memulai rangkaian acara, mari kita mengawali berdoa terlebih dahulu, agar acara ini dapat berjalan lancar dan membawa manfaat sebaik-baiknya. Berdoa sesuai dengan agama dan kepercayaan masing-masing dimulai. Berdoa selesai. Selanjutnya, saya akan menyampaikan susunan acara malam ini. menyanyikan lagu Indonesia Raya satu stanza, sambutan dari Wakil Dekan 1 Fakultas Psikologi, pengenalan pembicara, sharing pengalaman serta riset dengan pembicara, sesi tanya jawab, closing remarks oleh Profesor Dr. Yusti Pebawati, foto bersama, dan pengisian link evaluasi. Sebelum memulai acara, mari kita bersama-sama menyanyikan lagu kebangsaan Indonesia Raya. Para hadirin diharap untuk bersikap tegap. Hadirin dapat dipersilakan kembali ke posisi semula. Berikutnya, saya akan membacakan tata tertib agar acara berjalan dengan lancar. Peserta diharapkan mengganti nama sesuai dengan format, bagian dari ubaya, nama garis bawah S1 atau S2 atau S3. Bagi yang bukan dari ubaya, dipersilakan untuk menuliskan nama garis bawah mahasiswa atau dosen atau peneliti, garis bawah nama institusi. Peserta diharapkan mematikan mic saat sesi dimulai agar tidak mengganggu jalannya acara. Pertanyaan dapat disampaikan melalui fitur chat Zoom atau secara langsung dengan mengaktifkan fitur raise hand terlebih dahulu. Peserta diharapkan dapat mengaktifkan kamera saat sesi foto bersama di akhir sesi, serta menggunakan virtual background yang telah disediakan pada link yang dibagikan. Selanjutnya, mari kita mendengarkan sambutan dari Wakil Dekan 1 Fakultas Psikologi Universitas Surabaya. Kepada Bapak Ananta Yudiarso, Sarjana Sosial Magister Sains, dipersilahkan.
Baik, selamat malam semuanya. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Dean of Faculty of Psychology, Surabaya University, Dr. Evi Cahyono, first of all, we would like to thank to all the organizing committee who has working hard for this event, I think, and congratulations. Yeah, hopefully it's going to be successful, and many people or many teacher or lecturer or student will have advantages for this guest lecture. Yeah, we also thank to Dr. Tiwi as the head of Sosial Laboratory in Faculty of Psychology and Professor Yusti Pebawati as the head of Doctoral Education Program, and of course, especially we would like to thank you very much to Dr. Karen L. Parsonson, Ph.D., B.C.F.E. from University of Houston, United States. We are very happy to having you this evening. Yeah. As we know that the forensic psychology is very interesting theme in psychology, and many of our undergraduates, master students, and PhD candidates who had involved in forensic psychology class as well in research in forensic psychology. We hope that this night we're going to learn deeper about research in forensic psychology from Dr. Karen L. Parsonson. Yeah, I believe Dr. Karen will give us a lot of inspirations about research in forensics. Personally, I'm also interested in forensic psychology, especially in lie detector. Professor Yusti and me have research in lie detector using EEG and facial action unit, and we would like to apply to detect lie behavior among the persons. Of course, the Faculty of Psychology Surabaya highly supported this guest lecture, and we hope that we'll continue to other collaboration, especially in research program or exchange students and supervision for master or Ph.D. thesis between our institution and your institutions, especially in University of Houston. We hope everyone will enjoy much presentation from Dr. Karen this evening. Thank you, and that's all for all. Thank you.
Terima kasih para Paranta atas sambutannya. Di sini telah hadir bersama kami moderator yang akan memandu kuliah tamu pada malam ini. Tanpa berlama lagi, saya persilahkan moderator kita, Bu Tiwi.
Ya. Baik, selamat malam teman-teman sekalian. Terima kasih Pak Ananta tadi sudah mewakili Bu Evi sebagai dekan. Bu Evi sedang ada rutin untuk fisioterapi gitu. Dan teman-teman, ini kami juga agak serem juga nih. Karena Karen-nya belum datang. Jadi ya enggak tahu ini dia, saya mengontak berulang tapi kok belum muncul begitu. Jadi ya kita mesti saya mengusulkan saya akan tetap membacakan CV-nya dia secara pendek, tetapi saya juga meminta Bu Yusti, ini kita akrobat dikit ya, Bu Yusti untuk bisa menyampaikan forensik psikologi, dan kemudian mungkin kita sendiri bisa berdiskusi terlebih dahulu sambil menunggu Karen, semoga dia baik-baik saja begitu ya, karena dia ini jam 6 pagi gitu. Saya sudah menawarkan apakah berganti jam, tapi sepertinya beliau mengatakan nggak apa-apa begitu ya. Jadi ya sudah. Mungkin bisa ditayangkan. Iya. Ya, jadi ini wajahnya, gitu ya. Jadi nanti mungkin bisa mengenali. Dia adalah Associate Professor di Psikologi Forensik di University of Houston at Victoria, Texas. Nah, Victoria, tapi Texas ya. Kemudian dia Direktur Program Psikologi Forensik di Universitas yang sama, anggota dari sekian banyak asosiasi, begitu ya, untuk Canadian Psychological Association, juga APA. Hello, Karen.
Hello, Karen. I am so sorry. I am so sorry.
Good morning.
Good
morning, Karen.
I have been awake for a while, but the problem is I had it down with the time change that it was going to be this time tomorrow morning.
Oh.
Okay, so that's why, I mean, I couldn't believe it.
Okay, but it's okay. It's okay because we lengthened the schedule. So I'm still introducing you in Bahasa Indonesia. I hope it's okay.
Absolutely.
We try to summarize your very rich CV. Yeah. Okay, I will tell our audience. Yeah. Dia punya praktek pribadi full time gitu ya, seperti yang Anda baca teman-teman. Nah, kita pendekkan ya, jadi psikolog forensik itu sejak 97. Jadi kayaknya sampai sekarang deh. Lanjut. Kemudian expert witness testimoni begitu ya. Jadi kita bisa tanya-tanya itu juga nanti, ngajar S1 S2 di psikologi beragam rupa begitu, abnormal psychology, personality assessment dan seterusnya. Kemudian publikasinya banyak sekali dan dia sekarang juga sedang melakukan research kolaborasi antar negara begitu ya. Ini nanti dia akan bisa menjelaskan. So yeah, Karen, I have finished introducing you.
Thank you.
So I hope you are fine.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
fine.
Well,
I'm fine. No
before you
worries.
start, you're fine. Okay, great. Before you start your presentation, I should tell the audience, if friends, if you have some questions or thoughts that arise during Karen's presentation, please feel free to write it down directly in the Zoom chat. So after Karen finishes her presentation, we can immediately start the Q&A. Okay, now I leave it to you, Karen, to share your experience and research project.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, time is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to share, and I'm very interested to hear what types of forensic practice and research that you do out in Indonesia. Before I begin talking about this study, which I'm working on with about 6 of my graduate students right now, and what I'm going to present to you is only a part of it, because it's an international study, because I'm looking at what's happening in Canada, United States, New Zealand, and Australia. The reason that this research project is, I guess I'd have to say, a culmination of my clinical and my research experience throughout my career. I trained in forensic psychology back in the 1980s at what is now a closed but the most notorious penitentiary in Canada. There, my forensic training and practice was with obviously very dangerous offenders, dangerous sex offenders, and it was a maximum security penitentiary. At the same time, they had us training in working with other penitentiaries, super maximum security, etc. My research interests at that time were cross-cultural. And so that's why this study that I'm going to be talking to you about brings together the research part of my history and the forensic, the clinical part of my history. When I went on to go into practice, I ended up working with a lot of, as we call, Indigenous or Aboriginal offenders. In Canada, we call them our First Nations people. Okay, they are the original Canadians, essentially. I worked with a lot of them clinically, and actually, in some of the research I was doing while I was doing my doctorate, I was sent up to do research living on the native reserves. Living on the native reserves, yes. We'll do the PowerPoints in a second, absolutely.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah.
Living on the native reserves and seeing the impact of incarceration and the impact of poverty and lack of educational opportunities there. So all of this has sort of come together with this research study, because now I'm finally bringing together you'll be able to see how disproportionately Aboriginal offenders are incarcerated and are sentenced within the system as compared to the majority population. Okay, so this sort of, this actually allows me to hopefully work towards some policy initiatives. That would be my hope of what we get from this. There's no research that I've ever done that doesn't have a practical application. Okay, so we can get going with the PowerPoints if you'd like.
Yes.
Thank you.
Would you like us to play it for you?
Oh, I can do it. I have it set, I think, in order to
Okay.
share it. So if you're okay with that, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. So this is one part. I had sent Tiwi through my proposal for this research study, which there are four. Obviously there's four different countries that I'm looking at here. This is one that two of my graduate students who are now off doing their doctorates. I'm very proud of them. They ended up doing this particular study with me on the US. Because my study is so large and multi-staged, I have different people working on the Canadian data versus the Australian, New Zealand, and the American data. So here we're looking at what do we find in terms of how Indigenous or Aboriginal offenders are misrepresented in populations. I already knew, and the data is already out there, nobody ever put it together with these four countries, that we see many more Indigenous offenders who are incarcerated and involved in the justice system as compared to the proportion that you see them in the general population. So for example, there was a study done back in 2019 where in Australia, the Aboriginal population and the individuals from the Torres Strait, they were 28% of the adult population who were incarcerated, but they only represent 3.3% of the general population in Australia. How much more can you see that disproportion? In Canada, and this is growing since we wrote this even, we see 25% of the adult prisoner population is Indigenous peoples, our First Nations peoples, but they're only 4% of the Canadian general population. If you look at New Zealand, 50% of their offender population is Maori, but only 15.3% of their total population is represented by Maori. So there's something wrong. This is where there need to be some policy changes. If we look at the US, why I wanted to start with the US is because, particularly in the United States, I would say now living here, the Native population is a silent minority.
Komputer audio lah, ini bisa keluar anu nih.
Was there a question? Did I need to speak up maybe more?
No, sorry.
Oh, no worries, no worries. In the US, the Native population, the Native is a more silent majority, but up in Canada, they're very vocal and becoming more so. So if we look at the US, only 2% of the incarcerated population is what they call American Indians, which is, and yet they're only 1% of the population in the country. Okay. So what I was wondering about is, okay, so we've got double what we would expect, but we never hear about it here. And so it became important for us to start looking at individual states in the US. Were there some where there's smaller percentages? Or what were the trends? What were the patterns that we were seeing? So there's no question the research, even back in early 2003, people were already talking about there being this high proportion of Native Americans in the prisons in the US. But no one has carried that really any further. So it was time to update it. There was back in 2013, there was a sentencing commission that was established in the US, and they were already starting to see an increase in the number of American Indian offenders. 27.2% there was an increase within 5 years of that report. They did note that there were certain US states where we had higher Native populations where also they were represented more in the prison system. And those were Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, and parts of Oklahoma. So I'm going to map this all out for you. You'll see it map a little bit later in terms of where we see the largest concentrations, not only of Native Americans in the states, but also the higher proportion of that are incarcerated and involved in the justice system. They found that there was 20% of offenses were drug trafficking, for instance. And then following that was aggravated assault, and then fraud, firearms. So what they were seeing was that between 1999 and 2014, there were double the number of American Indian and Alaskan Native inmates in their local jails. And almost a quarter of them had been jailed for violent offenses. Obviously a problem. Trust me, you don't see it in newspapers here. It's not an issue. Whereas if you look at Canadian newspapers, it's there and people are trying to work on it. Okay. So if we look at youth, native youth in the justice system, there was some research done back in 2015, and they called it the Sentencing Project. And they did see increases in terms of Native youth in jails, county jails, and that sort of thing. And pretty much the same states where we'd seen higher proportions of adult Natives in jails as well, or in prison. So why is this happening? How is it explained in the research? Well, when it comes to incarceration, many variables come into play, but educational attainment is seen as an issue. We're going to see in a few minutes. I'm going to be talking about the percentage of Native Americans who finish high school is significantly lower than the majority population. Unemployment is rampant. Poverty, socioeconomic status, and substance abuse, they're all seen as underlying reasons for it. Now, also, we have institutionalized racism in terms of sentencing disparities, okay? These are well documented. And it's not only seen with respect to Native Americans, it's documented with African American and also Hispanic offenders. So, I mean, we've got underlying issues, and then we've also got the system itself that's against them. Okay, so, I'm talking about institutionalized racism, what's needed, sentencing reforms. The Bureau of Justice Statistics in the US says that American Indians are incarcerated at almost a 40% higher rate than the national average of the general population. They're twice more likely to be victims of violent crimes. And, we see many more Native Indian women who are victims of violence. There's another study that found that American Indian men are incarcerated 4 times the rate of white men, and American Indian women at 6 times the rate of white women. Okay. So I'm not going to belabor this. I mean, it's there. It's just no one's talking about it. There are countries that do something about it. There are culturally sensitive treatment and justice programs in Australia and in Canada and also in New Zealand. Okay, New Zealand has one. They started a restorative justice program for adults back in 1989, and then they moved on to doing the same for their juvenile justice system. Okay. So there have been calls for this in the US, but I haven't seen any response to it. We do have different sentencing alternatives that are practiced in Australia and Canada and New Zealand, because they're recognizing how the over disproportion of incarceration in their native populations. So this was the first part of the study. As I said, here we're looking at what's going on in the US. I have this concurrently going on for Canadian data and Australian and New Zealand, okay? Because there had been no updated research in terms of the disproportion of incarceration with specific states in the US. I mean, the number that I talked about of 2% of the incarcerated population is Native American versus 1% of the general population. That's not impactful for people. I mean, we know it's double, but they still look at it and say, oh, so what? It's only 2% of the population. But we needed to look at what's going on in individual states. Okay. So the comparison here is, I wasn't looking at other ethnicities because there's a lot of research in terms of African American and Hispanic people who are incarcerated. So here I'm looking at non-Native American versus American Indian offenders. What we did was we identified which were the states with the highest population of American Indians and Alaskan Natives and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. Okay. Then what we did was we looked at states that had not only the high percentage of American Indians, but the ones where the proportions were especially large, the disproportion. Okay, and this is based on the 2010 census. So we looked at the adult data. We also looked at the juvenile data. We've also managed to find to separate the two of these into the two genders. So we have 4 populations we're looking at: male and female adult Aboriginal offenders and male and female juvenile Aboriginal offenders. So looking at the 50 states, 13 of them were particularly disproportionate. And I'm just going to quickly show you the map that we put together here. So these are the states that had particularly disproportionate representation of Indigenous offenders. You're going to notice that we've got them color-coded just according to what we're seeing in the two different regions. Down at the bottom, you see in orange, Arizona and New Mexico. Okay, those are the southern states. Alaska, which is big and really doesn't belong there. It belongs further along, but between Alaska and Hawaii that we have in green, here we're dealing with a different ethnicity, really, because the Alaskan natives and the Hawaiians, they're somewhat independent of the natives in mainland US. If you look at the states that are purple there, I'm going to talk about this. Quite a number of them are on the border of Canada. And these are where they have these large proportions are exactly just south of the border where we have the same issue up in Canada with huge disproportion of Aboriginal offenders up there. Okay. So I'll refer back to this as we go along. So we see of these 13 states that are particularly disproportionate, 8 of them are in the northwest or west north central area. Those are the ones I showed you in purple. 2 are in the Pacific region, and that's Alaska and Hawaii, the 2 that were in green, and 2 are in the southwest, and that's Arizona and New Mexico. So we see that, we also have disproportion in terms of, whites versus blacks and Hispanics in the population. But, this wasn't the focus of my study, but the data most certainly shows that the racial and ethnic disparities. I'm not going to go through, each and every number here, but I wanted you to see which states in particular had the highest proportions. So Minnesota and North Dakota, Utah, Colorado, Nebraska, Wisconsin. All of these states actually are, there's like a corridor that comes down from Canada down to the US. I know it because my husband and I drive it all the time. Right now we're down in Texas in the US. When I'm up in Canada, we live in Alberta, and we drive all the way down this 2,500 miles between the two, and basically going through all of these states. There are very high proportions of Native Americans that live in these states, okay? And I guess to a certain extent, maybe it's no surprise that there's also high proportions, more likelihood that they may be involved, they may be incarcerated as well. But this seems to be a very, very huge misrepresent or overrepresentation in those states. So here we see the ratios. What we did was we looked at what is the ratio of their percentage of incarceration to the general population. If you look at Minnesota, it's 8-to-1. There are, for each one white incarcerated individual, there are 8 Native. Okay, they're not that populous in the general population in Minnesota. 29-5 for North Dakota, 4-1 for Utah, 4-1 for Colorado, Nebraska, and Wisconsin, 39-10 for Hawaii, 22-6 for Montana. So, I'm not belaboring it. Oh, on Alaska, 38. For every 15 white offenders, you're going to have 38 Alaskan Native offenders. The numbers are there. Okay. So there was data that was reported back in 2013. And this is data for 2017. And my students have found data for 2020, which we're currently looking to table. It's looking worse, as a matter of fact. So we see a similar pattern as that Sentencing Commission talked about, but we have new states that are starting to come to the forefront as well. Ones that they didn't see back in 2013. And these are Alaska, Colorado, Hawaii, Nebraska, Utah, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. And some of the states that were seen as worse are being reordered as well. So for these 13 states, now we see a gender issue coming into play. The American Indian females are consistently, the percentages of them in prison relative to white and Hispanic females is much higher. They're more than double that of white females who are incarcerated, except for, the smallest one is New Mexico, where they're 1.8 times higher. If we look at Minnesota, the American Indian females are more than 18 times that of white females. And for North Dakota, it's 13 times. So yeah, we still do have disproportion in terms of seeing more Hispanic females in prisons and Black females in prisons relative to whites, but the numbers are even higher when you're looking at the Indigenous Native American female population. What about youth? Well, like I said, if you're seeing the adults in certain states that are incarcerated, it wouldn't be unexpected that you'd see the same thing happening for youth. And we see that in terms of compared to the adult population in the US, we see the highest rates of incarceration for American Indian youth in Nebraska. And the order is somewhat different, but it's still the same states where we see the huge disproportion. North Dakota, Wyoming, South Dakota, and Alaska. And just like we saw with the adult females, when we look at the American Indian female youth, they're much higher incarceration compared to white, Black, and Hispanic youth females. So there was one interesting one. We didn't know how to explain it. So for the most part, we see the juvenile males who are incarcerated more so than the females. But in Nebraska, Wyoming, and Colorado, the females actually outnumbered the males. Don't know why, but I do know that there's a trend that we're seeing in the US where we are seeing higher rates of just in females in general, of young females that are involved in the justice system. We're seeing, it used to be so much more, across the board, independent of ethnicity or race. It used to be that youth, boys, were much more likely to be caught up in the justice system. But now we're starting to see a huge rise in young females that are as well. So those are the numbers. Now, when I talk about policy, we've seen this trend. We've seen the data going on in the US forever. I reported data, back in 2005, but there was some before. We're seeing it continue and we're seeing it get worse. What are other countries doing about it? I talked about Australia and New Zealand and Canada having treatment programs and restorative justice programs. We wanted to see what is in operation here in the US. Do they have programs that are there that are culturally specific to help Native Indian offenders reintegrate and rehabilitate back into society? So we looked at these same 13 states, and what did we find? Well, now this is just according to the Bureau of Justice. They have an assistance resource center. Only Alaska, Hawaii, and North Dakota had anything that even mentioned Native American or Native Hawaiian specific services. Okay. For Hawaii, there was one program and that was listed, and they had 13 programs. Only one of them mentioned anything culturally relevant. And in North Dakota, they mentioned one, but there was only one of 10 resources that were available. None of the other 10 states had any specific services with respect to American Indians. The resource center, they had 33 listings of all these resources in Arizona, 16 in Colorado, 15 in Nebraska. You get the point. None of them had anything that was there for Native American offenders in terms of rehabilitation or anything that was culturally sensitive. So then we looked at what treatment programs are out there. What culturally sensitive treatment programs could we find that were specific to American Indian offenders? There were a lot of substance abuse programs that were there, and also sex offense reentry programs. So these were the only two topic areas that we could find out there. But you know, if you in examining what is available or what treatments are available on reserves, it's been very well demonstrated using reentry programs like the medicine wheel and 12 steps, with smudging and pipe ceremonies and sweat lodges and drum circles and talking circles, that the resources, the skill set is there on the reserves, but it's not being employed in the US anyways. The healthcare system in the US they did develop what was called the Division of Behavioral Health Indian Health Service. Probably a couple of decades ago. And they did note that they have a number of specific programs. They call it forensic healthcare, alcohol and substance abuse prevention, and domestic and family violence prevention. But none of them are connected with the prisons. And we need that. I mean, as much as there's a pipeline that seems to go from the child welfare system to young people getting involved in the justice system, there's nothing that helps direct people back to their community when they've been incarcerated, or is it all culturally sensitive when they are in prison? So what about substance abuse treatment? Yes, that was one that came up a lot at the time. So we do have the National Rehab Directory of American Addiction Centers did talk about there being programs with the Indian Health Service. There is an office of Alcoholics Anonymous that works along with, that follows the meeting structure of AA, and that is run by the Native American. There's a Native American specific part of the organization. And we do have some drug rehab services that are available at different states, but they don't seem to be connected specifically to the justice system. Okay. There's also sex offender treatment. That there's a new project that's just started up. It's the Native American Sex Offender Management Project. And there are some tribes that are developing their own sex offender registries. And these ones are New Mexico, Oklahoma, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. And there you go. These are some of the states that I'm talking about that have the high disproportions. So this is coming from within the Native American population. They're wanting to make the difference there. So, like I said, these results aren't new. All they go on to do is to show that this problem is growing, okay? And that it's not only adults, that it's in young people. We see it in juveniles who are involved in the system. And it's growing relative to their white counterparts. We see that the information that was published before from the different bureaus of statistics and all of that, they really don't present the full picture. Because you have to really understand where the highest concentrations are in terms of these populations in the US. Because there's only 13 of the 50 states that are showing this, it's very easy to ignore it because it's almost like, because it's not seen everywhere. And these are not necessarily the most populous states in the first place. If you're not seeing it in states like California or New York or whatever, or Texas necessarily, it doesn't become big news. Okay? So, like I said, we have the two Southwest states, and then we have the two Pacific states that are represented here, and then essentially it's almost like that central towards the north area of the US where we see the largest concentrations. Something that a lot of people don't realize is that when we talk about Native Americans or when we talk about First Nations people in Canada, what they don't realize is we're not talking about a homogeneous population. There are 574 federally recognized tribes in the US alone, and they are not the same cultures. They are all different cultures, and that's not recognized. And so they all get lumped together, okay? And they each have distinct cultural features. So even in terms of providing culturally sensitive services, much would depend upon what tribe people would even come from, because what you do for them may not resonate with them in terms of the culture that they come from. Because white society, the fact that their stereotyping goes on, I mean, horribly so, but people get lumped together. And so, this is something that if you haven't worked with Aboriginal populations, people aren't even aware of the differences between the different tribal cultures. It's the same, I mean, in terms of what are the reasons for this, okay, I talked about it before. Socioeconomic status, poverty, lack of education. If you look at the Alaska Natives and American Indians, they are those who actually attend post-secondary education is 17% compared to 60% in the US. The percentage who are in poverty back in 2017 was more than a quarter of the 26.8% compared to 14.6% for the nation. The household income is 17,000 less on average for the Aboriginal population compared to the nation as a whole. Okay. When we look at children in school, 32% of children in the Aboriginal population, only that percentage were not absent from school at some point. Okay? So we see it happening in terms of economics, in terms of education, in every which way. Then if we filter in substance use and abuse issues, here, this is actually more recent data here. We have a national survey on drug use and health found that 10% of American Indians have a substance use disorder. Nearly 25% report binge drinking in the past month. They're much more likely to report drug abuse in the past month or year than any other ethnic group. Okay. And yet the substance use and abuse issues are also intertwined with the other ones that I've talked about. Unemployment, low school completion, and it just becomes a part of an extension of poverty, lack of education, unemployment. So what about gender? Here we see, for the most part, American Indian females. There are more of them that are incarcerated than Black, white, and Hispanic. Okay. We also see this when we're looking at female youth, female Native American youth, with a few exceptions. So what I was mentioning, yes, we are seeing a trend for those of us who work in the justice system. We do see more female criminal behavior happening. And I guess it's not surprising that we'd see the same trend happening with the juvenile and adult Native American females. The same trend in terms of more youth crime and more violent youth crime that we see just in general in the population in the US. We're seeing the same thing happening with the Native American youth. So why this disproportion? Well, here, when we're looking at young people, we have the influence of the child welfare system here. Back in 2014, it was shown that a third of American Indian children are not even in their homes. They're in foster care, or they're in adoptive homes, or other different types of institutions or educational activities. Okay? So these children being taken from their homes, they lose their family, they lose their culture, they're traumatized by it. And many of them get into using substances in order to cope with the trauma, okay? Which of course feeds into criminal behavior. So if you've got a third of them that aren't even living with their families or connected with their culture, it's inevitable that there's going to be problems, either internalized or externalized. If they're internalized and we've got depression due to the trauma, well, substance abuse is how people self-medicate. If it's externalized in terms of frustration and violent behaviors, that's going to get them involved in the justice system. Okay, so it's just a revolving door. What about treatment programs? Well, I've been talking about what treatment programs that are there in Canada and Australia and New Zealand that are actually attached to prisons. There's actually a female prison in Canada that was just set up, that is run by and developed for Native Canadian female offenders, an entirely Native run prison. Okay, so it's out there, but no one's doing it. When we looked at what programs were available, how we could connect these people, of the 13 states, only 4 even mentioned anything to do with culture for that connection of people involved, Native people involved in the justice system, back to their own culture and back to their own communities. But other countries, oh yeah, there it is. It's the Buffalo Sage. That's the Indigenous Federal Prison for Women. Okay, that's in Canada. And you know, there are some programs. They're the Navajo Nation. They have a peacemaking program that they run. There's in Canada, there's the sentencing circles. And, you know, it's there, but it's not being accessed and not on a regular basis. So if we look at the future in terms of policies, of course, disproportionate numbers of American Indians are incarcerated. And people knew about it, and it continues, and it's getting worse, even more so for young people. So yes, there's some awareness, you know, even at the judicial level, but it's not making a difference. There need to be reentry resources that are available. Okay. I mean, there do seem to be some when we're looking at substance abuse issues and sex offender treatment, but those aren't the only issues that are underlying when you're dealing with this population. We need communities to be involved, because they have their own healing and their own therapeutic programs, and they have been a part of this culture before we even came to North America. They know how to heal themselves. But, and we know that in order to be successful and not to re-enter the system again, people need to connect with their families, with their communities, with their cultures. And this isn't happening here in the US. We need systematic change. We've got to have something done with respect to the institutionalized racism that we see in terms of sentencing. In terms of the number, a third of Native American children involved in the foster care system, well, something's got to happen there, because many of those children are being adopted or fostered not into Native American homes. So that's serving to disenfranchise them from their cultures even more. In terms of the school system, obviously, you know, if people are better educated, they have greater opportunity to be employed, okay? So less likelihood of poverty. There needs to be culturally sensitive and culturally aware educational programs that are available on reserves. And when it comes to sentencing practices, countries do have restorative justice programs. And this promotes autonomy and promotes respect and dignity for their populations. But we're not seeing this in the US. And so we need community leaders to be involved from within the Native, the Aboriginal communities, to be encouraged to be a part of the solution. Because for right now, as my title says, they are a very silent majority. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stijn. Thank you very much. Your presentations is really valuable in enriching, yeah, and deepening our understanding about approach in doing research. Yeah.
Thank you.
Which is, I think, it is really care about the minority, being more critical about the system, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much. And now we are, yeah, yes. Okay, and now we are in a session of Q&A. I believe there are, oh yes, we have one questions right now. I invite our friends here to also raise questions to maybe clarifying things or deepening. And also if somebody wants to share their experience, their research, we can also do that. Okay, there is two questions coming from Pak Ananta. Pak Ananta is the Vice Dean of this faculty, and also from Yusti, your friend. We are all friends. Yeah, from Ananta, he has thoughts like this. Due to the increasing number of indigenous offender in US and UK and also New Zealand, what is the roots of causes? Was it because of values being minority, the act of crime as a class struggle, or was it because of increasing racism to indigenous injustice system among the countries? It's very, or maybe Ananta can speak for yourself. Yeah,
you read my question very well. Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering about being minority and low education and very discriminated, I think. And in my idea, Karen is I think it's very interesting for me, because was it because the increases of racism in United States? We know that the list is very high of the racism acts, and it's going to be, it's easier, much easier to, to blame the black one, or of course of the minority actually, or actually, is it because of, it's the crime is not only meaning of the crime action actually, is rebellion expression from the minority, because the silent majority is very quiet, they don't care about the minority. When they get the crime action, they get the attention from the government. Sometimes I read some newspaper that, for example, in some European people, they even choose to go to the jails because the jails is much better food, much better conditions than in the house. Yeah. I was thinking about that, and I think it's very interesting, and we can replicate your research in Indonesia, because I believe that we're going to have the same data from the minority offenders. And the restorative justice that you propose is very, very fit with the idea from Professor Yusti, but it's limited to the children who have problem with the law. But we never applied to the minority population. I think it's going to be good. For example, in sentencing program, we can propose that it's not going to be to go in jail. So we can maybe propose that, like the social worker in ours in community, and bring them back into the community, and maybe it's going to be like what the American community psychologist Rapopov idea in 1960, right? Let's go back to the idea about the Rapopov, yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
That's all, thank you. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, but I had done some research earlier on. Well, when I knew I was doing this presentation, I wanted to see what native populations you have in Indonesia. And I was amazed to see that you have very similar issues in terms of a large number involved in the justice system as well. So to hear that you have that opportunity to put this into practice, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
For there to be, the justice system actually relating to youth and providing them with this culturally sensitive rehabilitation. I mean, it's going to make a difference, and it's got to start at the younger age, because otherwise they're going to go on to be adults who are still offending. Very interesting point that you make in terms of is this acting out? Is this rebellion? Is this the silent majority's way of rebelling against the majority by offending?
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way. That's very interesting. Something I have to think about some more.
Yeah.
But you're right. We're looking at not just systemic issues in terms of racism, but we are also looking at the oppressive issues in terms of the discrimination when we look at lack of access to proper education, lack of access to which leads to greater unemployment and that sort of thing. It's very paternalistic. It's very paternalistic how Native Americans are treated within the system. I mean, almost treating them like children, like they're not adult enough to make their own decisions, or with dignity, or having autonomy and respect.
But do you think also it happened in Canada? Because I heard that Canada have a very good, like the social medicine there is working well, and also I think social security program is also going well. But what the most the root of the causes in minority in Canada then?
It's generational. Right now, oh yes, I mean you're absolutely right. I mean, in Canada, yes, socialized medicine, great, but access to it is not as easy for the Native population. They don't have as easy access to it. It's there, but if they're up on isolated reserves or whatever, they don't have as easy access to it. Plus, there's this whole issue going on in Canada right now where the generationally, boy, this is really hard to even explain. The Canadian system put Native Canadians into what they called residential schools.
Oh,
did you hear about the residential schools? Where these children were taken away from their parents and put on these schools that were run by Catholic missionaries, and basically they tried to reprogram them so that they would lose their culture. They wouldn't let them speak their own language. They cut their hair. They punished them for and the trauma of that, of generations of that. I mean, substance abuse came out of it, suicides came out of it, domestic violence came out of it, and this had been going on since the early 1900s, and it was only stopped in the late 1970s, early 1980s. So we have generations of people who've been abused by the system, and then it carries on in terms of the raising of their own children with this trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. So Canada does not have a history to be proud of with its Native people. Yes, they're making inroads right now, but the access to resources is not there, and we do have long-standing trauma that carries on from these residential schools.
Yeah, I think the last explanation from you lead to use these questions, because for us, of course, your research is very interesting, and we have similar picture, from low economic status, low education. What is very interesting is how could you please explain your strategy so that the research you do can influence state policy? Because as you mentioned, it is intergenerational issues, because most of the time research stops only on publication, scopus and all those things, and cannot be applied really. What could you explain your strategy, maybe the flaws or also the success stories, please?
Do you mean in terms of how this research can make a difference, or
influence the policy? Influence the policy.
Okay. Well, I mean, the first part of it, from my perspective, is starting to get this published, because we did this presentation during the pandemic, and obviously we did it on remotely. Now we need to get the study out into an international journal. And I like to publish in international journals because that way we get a very large readership around the world, and an opportunity for collaboration as well. How I see it potentially making a difference is once we have all of the data with respect to all 4 of the countries, what I'm hoping to do is to try and I honestly, I can't get funding to do this research. I have applied for so many grants. I mean, it just shows you how in the US, if I was doing this in Canada, I would have funding right away. But in the US, absolutely. Absolutely. Any research, there are so many grants up there in Canada, but in good conscience, I can't because I'm working down in the US right now.
Because it's very sensitive.
I know, but and everybody says to me, well, I know, I think I've applied for, oh goodness, 8 grants. And it fit because it was about ethnicity and it was about change and being an agent of change, but no interest whatsoever. And my institution keeps saying to me, it's really interesting, but maybe you should just do it on Black people and Hispanics, then you'll get funded. I'm going, that's not the point. Everybody knows they're overrepresented. No one knows about this population.
Yeah.
So, maybe that's not being able to get the funding. And, thankfully, I just keep working on things. I don't care if there's no money for it. I'm going to keep working on it. And my students are passionate about it. And not only is it my students, but these 2 who did this study with me, they're my alumni now. And they're still working on the data with me because they're passionate about it and they believe in it. Okay. So, just because I can't get funding for it, does that mean that no one's going to be interested? No, because what I'm hoping is with getting the research published from each of the 4 countries, putting it all together, that I can make a point with the justice system. Not that I'm going to, show up at their doors and knock on and say, "Hi, I'm Dr. Karen, can we talk?" But what I'm hoping is that I can make some connections with the justice system. The problem is in the US, it's not like in Canada, which I grew up with. Trying to get this data together has been a nightmare in the US because not only are there state agencies, but there's federal agencies, but then you've got tribal justice agencies, and then you've got, what do they call them? Indian jails. And so there's no central repository for this data. My students and I have been tearing our hair out trying to pull it all together because it's everywhere. Probably in about 8 to 10 different places. It's not like there's something that's centralized like there is in Canada. Canada has, and Australia and New Zealand have a central repository where all of their data goes when it comes to justice. But the US, it's all over. And you just find bits and pieces of it everywhere. So, maybe I have to start small. Maybe I have to start one state at a time. Because frankly, in Canada, because the justice system is federal, and so, whatever laws are in place, every province follows the same laws. It's not the same in the US. I mean, I'm in Texas. Trust me, it's like the Wild West out here. The laws here, they are so different from the rest of the country. So, it may need to be something of connecting with the native populations in specific states and helping them to advocate for themselves.
Okay.
Sometimes you have to start inside out.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. There is also another question from our student, undergraduate student, Yogi. He asked about, since when did residential schools exist and what is the reason behind it. He also thought that diverse cultures in a nation, it will enrich the nation itself. What do you think about that?
I think that that's a wonderful statement that you made, Yogi. I think that the diversity of the world is what brings it to color and brings it. I teach about cultural diversity and sensitivity all the time. Without it, we would have a very boring and sad world. And so, absolutely. The residential schools are a stain and a shame on Canadian history. And I'm only now discovering they actually had them in the US. No one's talked about it very much, but I'm starting to hear little whispers of it. So I've got to dig into that a little bit more. Residential schools were started by the Catholic school system.
Yeah. There's a film on that.
Late 1800s. And, it's brutal, absolutely brutal what went on with these people. And really, I think they only started shutting them down in the 1970s. I think the last one was shut down probably in the 70s. When I was working on, no, that's not true. Because when I was working on the reserves, as a graduate student, there were still children that were going off to residential schools. And that was in the early 80s. So it went on for probably a century. What was the reasoning behind it? To be frank with you, and I'll be very blunt, it was believed that Native people were heathens, were not, because they didn't follow the religion, that they were inhuman, subhuman, however you want to look at it, and that their children needed to be civilized and humanized. So they were, if you got their culture out of them, perhaps you could make them human. And that's what's underlying. It almost feels terrible to describing it.
Sorry, the voice is a bit strange. Is it only from me or everyone else also think the voice, or maybe it's only me?
Can you hear me okay, or or is there an echo or something?
Yang lain gimana ya? Nggak apa-apa ya? Yang lain gimana?
Yeah, listen as well. It's a little bit.
Is it okay?
What do you call it? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe.
Yeah.
No problem. Okay. Yeah. Okay. The voice is static in some moment. Oh, okay. Okay. Is there anyone else who have some questions? I'm trying to shut myself up.
I think you have to announce that
to you.
The student could ask in Bahasa Indonesia and you're going to translate.
Yeah. Please, students. Well, while waiting for them, I wonder, Karen. I wonder if people only look at numbers from a stereotypical perspective about minorities, and it's usually been done by people who are in powerful position, then the results will strengthen the existing stereotypes. What do you think about that? Because how is the picture of the dominant political and economical interest using these numbers? I think it is also relates to the institutionalization of racism and also sexism. What do you think about that? Because we also meet with that kind of issues.
Oh, I agree with you.
What do you
I agree with you that looking at these numbers, it may only solidify for those in power. Oh, okay, look, we got a problem, but are they necessarily going to want to do anything about it? I mean, like I said, they've seen the numbers since, at least the year 2000. They've seen the numbers, and now it's growing. So what are they willing to do about it, or do they just want to ignore it? The problem is when you look at numbers, we know, okay, I'm going to give you an example. If we see some natural disaster that happens in North America, people take it to heart. People say, oh my goodness, 30 people, this bridge collapsed. Oh, those poor families. But people in North America read about some tragedy that happens in Central Asia or in Asia. Maybe a ferry boat goes down with 1,800 people, and they go, oh, that's really sad. Numbers don't mean anything to them because it's so far away. It's not relevant to them, is my point that I'm making. I think the same thing is true for this. We can show the numbers. We can say 50% of Native Americans end up in jail. And they go, oh, those are big numbers. But it's not personal to them because it's hidden. It's not in their face all the time, right? So it's a tough sell. And like I said, unless we can get the Native community, the American Indian community, to start advocating for itself and saying, okay, you know what? Here's the numbers. We have the numbers. The data's here. These papers were published. Help us with this. Because we can do it, but we need the resources to help us do it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, is there anyone would like to ask? Boleh loh bahasa Indonesia, nggak apa-apa. Sorry, I'm speaking in Indonesian.
Oh, please.
Problem is in my laptop. I don't know. The voice is like break like. So
Vibrate.
Your voice is okay, Pak, but Karen's voice is like. Before that is okay. Ada lagi kah pertanyaan, teman-teman? Yeah, okay. If not, then we still have some time for sharing of research that has been done in Indonesia. Of course, we are not talking about Indonesia as a whole, but research that has been done maybe under the supervised by Justi and some friends here. Maybe Justi would like to say something about this.
Oh, I would love to hear it.
Yeah. Thank you, Dewi. Can you stop your share screen, Karen?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Belum bisa ya, Mbak?
Ya, ini teman-teman bisa kasih ruang untuk Yusti untuk presentasi. Panitia.
Okay. Udah.
Oke. Okay. Di spotlight mungkin Yusti.
Udah kelihatan ya, Mbak?
Sudah.
Okay. Thank you, Karen, for your sharing research. I try to explain the research in my campus, because I can say that in Indonesia, actually in Indonesia, we have a Forensik Psikologi Association, and in practice, we handle many criminal cases in police, in prosecutor office, as well as being expert witness in court and also in prison. And I myself focus on child offender. I did training for prison officer. ITV and IUNI also have a child offender shelter. and we do rehabilitation on children. Also, we conduct research, forensic research. And now I will share some of the forensic research that I do by myself and colleagues, and also I as supervisor or as examiner at the undergraduate, master, and doctoral level. I classify this research according to the criminal law system in Indonesia, starting from the police, prosecutor, court, and prison.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this.
I just share about the title of the research. There's some research in investigation states about criminal profiling. I have some research factor that causes psychosocial and drug recidivism. Another is relationship between dark triad personality and corrupt intention in civil servant, and also psychological profiling of child perpetrator and child recidivist in children prison in Blitar. Another is about callous and emotional trait on male convict who perpetrated murder. The other research about investigation of perpetrator. One of my research with Ananta Yudiarso is effect of passive flying on lie detection by electro EEG. Maybe Ananta can explain after this. Another research is about module for psychologists in the psychological examination of child criminal at investigation state. This module I make with my student, and we train the psychologists to how to handle child criminal at the investigation state in police.
Wow.
In witness, I have the other research about the effectiveness of cognitive interview compared to the structure interview on child witness and theft cases. Yeah. The other is the effectiveness of the method of testimony with simultan and sequential on accuracy of facial testimony. Okay. And then the other research in judge as prosecutor, the influence of the prosecutor reproaches and the authoritarian personality of the judge on the judge decision. It's about sentencing, yeah, sentencing.
Oh, that's interesting too.
Yeah, there is the effect of length of the sentence, the age of preparator, and the pressure of time on the judge assessment of justice for the preparator of rape. This is the experiment study, the differences in sentences between male and female prisoner. The difference in punishment or sentences between Chinese ethnic and indigenous prisoner. It is also, I compare about the sentences with the same cases, but the ethnic is different, ethnic Chinese and indigenous prisoner. In correctional psychology, I have some research, the effectiveness of psychological assessment module for child prison officer, the impact of imprisonment on drug convict in drug detention center. It is one of the research of my student. The effectiveness of psychological assessment module for BAPAS officer in cases of children, and states of resilience in children in conflict with law. I think that's some of research in Indonesia. We try to mix some data with the research in forensic psychology, but my focus is about the child prisoner. In Indonesia, we still have child prisoner, and there is no rehabilitation, psychological rehabilitation in child prisoner. So it's very worse. That's why I and my college try to give some training to the child prisoner officer how to handle the child. So that's why I asked to you how the strategy to implementation our research to the real prison, because it's very difficult. We have some research. We know that it's not true how they handle the child, but we can make some. We cannot push the policy of the state. That's some problem in Indonesia about the child prison in Indonesia. I think this is some of research I have made with my student or with my colleagues. Karen.
It's wonderful. It's so comprehensive, your state.
Maybe Ayuni will say something about the research also. They have prepared about the research in our shelter. We have shelter for the children after they release from the prison. We have shelter in Jombang. Jombang is maybe 1 hour from Surabaya. Here we have some shelter, and Ayuni and I have researched the effectiveness of shelter, this shelter to the children.
But you see, maybe you have to mention that we are 43 minutes from Surabaya to Bali, Denpasar.
Oh yeah. 3 minutes by plane.
So maybe when we invite you, then it's 43 minutes from our city to Denpasar, Bali.
After the pandemic, yeah, Karen.
Yeah.
Please, Ayuni.
I would love it. So, I mean, you're looking at my passion, which is applying. We have to understand what the problems are first. People don't understand problems until they see it in numbers. Unfortunately, sometimes those numbers get lost in terms of where they go to, because they're meant to prove a point so that we can do something about them. So then you're looking at where to approach the system. I mean, if you go to the top, are they even going to be interested necessarily? Or do you go to, I mean, maybe you don't have the opportunity, to go to the justice system and say, you've got to make a policy change. Maybe they'll say, great, you've got numbers, but no. Maybe you go to each individual institution where you may have the head of an institution that says, yeah, we know it's a problem and we're willing to listen if you can help us out. Maybe you get at it through individual caseworkers who are willing to maybe let you in to do a workshop or something that can teach the hands-on workers how practical approaches what would work. And maybe you get at the grassroots of the whole thing and you try and help. I mean, I'm not saying you can't do multiple things here, but maybe you just get at the group themselves, the parents of these children, to advocate for their children with the government. Okay, our kids are in trouble, but how is this going to make them better human beings with them being treated this way? All you're going to do is they're going to end up staying in the system their whole lives. Right? So I mean, sometimes it has to be approached at all different levels.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe Ayuni would like to share what you have prepared.
Okay, I just want to share my research that I did it on the year of 2015 under supervision of Ibu Yusti. Yeah. I evaluated the program of psychological mentoring on children conflicted with law in Rumah Hati Shelter that located in Jombang. This is already mentioned before. In the shelter, me, Ibu Yusti, Ibu Tiwi also take a part in running it together with 3 personnel and also 2 psychologists. The objective of this research is to evaluate the program of psychological mentoring on children conflicted with the law in Rumah Hati shelter. That's settling the case through diversion process by restorative justice approach.
And so is this still being carried on?
Yeah.
Is it ongoing?
Yeah, the shelter is still.
The shelter, yeah. The
That's
research
good.
is done.
That's great.
The intervention conducted in shelter are psychological mentoring, such as building discipline, child counseling, drama therapy, family counseling, and also educational rehabilitation, both formal and informal. We have already known that the characteristic of children conflict with the law mostly are low of self-control, low self-esteem because of society stigma and mostly neglect parenting. So the program provides to fulfill the need of those children. This research is used positivistic paradigm and qualitative data collected from some interviews. The participants are 2 children of children who are engaged in theft. Actually, in the beginning, I worked with 3 children, but one of them was run away from our shelter in the process of the research. And different family background of the 2 participants and the limited number of participants are the main consideration of me to use qualitative data. The result of evaluation is successful on the child who gains family support, but unsuccessful on one of those who does not. Yeah. This research found out that family social support is a significant aspect. In the unsuccessful case, the most ineffective intervention is the counseling to the child and family. So based on the research, it can be concluded that Rumah Hati should pay more attention to family support during the mentoring process. On the children who lack of social support, the quality of family counseling needs to be increased. Okay, that's all is a brief of my last research.
Wow, that's a very important study. And
I just want, is it possible to get guidebook of re-entry program? Because it might be useful for us to learn. Yeah, maybe some of it can be implemented in our shelter.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ayuni. Yeah. Well, we are now in our last session. Actually, it's in Texas. It's still early, yeah, well, so-called early morning, but here in Surabaya, it's already 9 o'clock p.m.
Near midnight.
Yeah. So I would like to ask Professor Justi to give some remarks, closing remarks. And after that, we have a small, well, a little memento from us for you, Karen. This just okay. You see, you can.
Thank you, Dewi. Karen, thank you for your valuable sharing. This will enrich us in developing forensic research in Indonesia. I hope we can meet face to face. Yeah, when you go to Malaysia, you stop by in Indonesia. We also have that in the future we can collaborate on forensic psychology research with you. Maybe we can discuss
more after this, yeah?
after this, yeah. As
Mhm.
a thank you, we will give you a little gift, you know. I hope this gift can remind you of the psychology faculty of University of Surabaya. This is our gift for you.
Memento for you. We will send it to you.
We will send.
Thank you. Oh,
You're welcome.
and I look forward very much to collaborating on research. I think that would
Okay.
be wonderful.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, we will close this, and maybe we can master of ceremony. Now it's your time.
Me?
Ya, baik. Terima kasih, Bu Tiwi.
It's in Indonesian, ya, bahasa Indonesia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ya, thank you, Mas Karen. Oke, selanjutnya peserta dapat mengisi rank evaluasi yang dibagikan.
Tolong dibagikan, ya. Nanti silakan mengisi.
Oke. Sebelum mengakhiri kuliah tamu pada malam ini, peserta dapat mempersiapkan diri dan menyalakan kamera untuk foto bersama.
Okay, so thank you so much, Karen. We will continue these relations and in the next days or so.
It's been my honor. It's really been my honor. Thank you so much for having me, for your enthusiasm, and for your interest in what I do. And I would love to carry on working together.
Thank you.
Do some wonderful work there too. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen.
Pak Ananda want to say something?
Pak Ananda?
Yeah, on behalf of the faculty, we would like to very thank you very much for Dr. Karen, and as Professor Susi state that hopefully we going have collaboration, especially in research or maybe supervisions for PhD candidates and or master degree thesis or dissertations. And I believe that we can replicate your research in Indonesia, and that will be very bright for future for the indigenous or native offenders. I believe that is someone or university have to sound about this problem. I think this is must. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Karen.
Bye.
Terima kasih, Bu Bapak, teman-teman sekalian.